Okay, we are recording. Well, welcome to today's Changing the Game session. I'm your host, Jennifer Hensley, a Playmaker Coaching and Consulting. Great to have you here today on our last episode of our series on increasing your know, like, and trust, because we know people want to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. So today I'm here with Joe Pitterle, and Joe has a really strong practice, high lives, but we've been working together this last year and talking about how do you start to continue to shift that to work more with the people that you really want to work with. So we're going to dive into our topic to 10 today and give you guys some ideas on how this might work with your practice and with some of the learnings that Joe has had in his. So Joe, why don't you start us off with when somebody first meets you, how do you like to introduce yourself to them? How do you explain who you are, what you do?
Sure, and thanks for having me along today, Jen. I like to really introduce myself, well, first as a wealth management advisor, but really as an educator and a friend. Someone who's looking to build a collaborative relationship that's focused on their goals, their needs, and also not excited not only to work with them now, but also build that mindset that we're going to have a long-term relationship, potentially multi-generationally, and especially if they have kids. Having a young family myself, I've always found it really relatable to share our family and with the others that we work with and talk about, the relationship I've had with Northwestern for 30 plus years. So really it's that long-term mindset, but education, a friend, in addition to obviously being an advisor.
Well, I love that because that leads perfectly into our conversation today too, about when you're talking about being relatable, being, know, like, and trust, sharing your experiences, making you human, I think is a big part of that. So when you think about those different pieces, know, like, and trust, is there one of them that you feel like maybe you've struggled with the most in your career journey?
Yeah, I think initially the trusted part was a big concern. And some of this, I think we've probably told ourselves, right? It's like the messaging that we have. But the one that manifested was how can a career changer, especially somebody who used to be in technology, be relevant in financial services? So initially, for me, trust, I think, was a big factor because I felt like we could build relationships. People would like us, people would know us. But I feel like the trust was my first hurdle.
Hmm. So tell us a little bit about, what are some of the things you've done that's really helped you, either change that perception that other people have of you or more for yourself to kind of get beyond that, hesitation that maybe they don't trust you.
Sure. Well, and some of this will go back to some of the rule of the room stuff, coaching that I've had. But the first thing I'll say is there's always an equal thought that's probably just as equally true that we have to tell ourselves. So I think the earlier I could kind of come to there's an alternate reality that might be just as positive as the negative one we have, that's part of it. But what really helped is the joint work culture that Northwestern has, our agency has. It was really able to help kind of put that to rest a bit. And also I would use words like we, us, our team, our company, Northwestern Mutual versus I. And I've always leaned on a bigger element versus my own experience. Even to this day, I have no problem bringing up how strong Northwestern is, using their reputation and size as part of the approach. It just makes me feel part of something bigger. But especially when I was new to the business, that was one way that I felt like trust could be gained. Another thing I did a lot back in the day, and I still to this day will do, is share my own story of where my grandfather was a rep briefly in the 1950s, post World War II. And then ultimately, he ended up being his own waiver of claim for 50 years when he was diagnosed schizophrenic a couple of years later. And then ironically, you fast forward and being in Milwaukee, right, Northwestern is so deep. But in the 1990s, my grandma's next door neighbor, and I spent a lot of time with my grandma, he was a brand new Northwestern Mutual rep. And ultimately, my grandma bought a policy like that. And next thing you know, I was insured with the company. And then fast forward another 20 plus years, my wife and I sat down with him for our planning. And eventually, he's the one who recruited me to switch careers. So I'll joke about having a 30 plus year relationship. But, I've only been an advisor the past 9 years. But then here's another relatable piece. I was on the client side of the table too before I was an advisor. So I like to share that. I appreciate their perspective and I've been in their shoes as we build those relationships.
Yeah, I think those are all really helpful things to think about, especially with a lot of our audience maybe being newer advisors that you may not have, an AFR or several people on your team, but how do you leverage the people that you do have, that you aren't all alone, or the brand of the company, like you said, that and your experience maybe as a client coming into this ahead of time too, that you really do have a lot of credibility in this space and life experiences maybe that you can pull from to share with your audience. So tell us a little bit, as you've done that and everything, how do you feel like things are different for you now? How has that really positioned you today with your clients?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that in just one second, and I'll just add one more piece too, Jen. I'm a big believer in also our own education and learning from joint work, having been in other situations, meeting other professions, repetition, especially if you're new to the business, early activity, high activity is a good way to just get practice. I think they said you're not going to be an expert with the fact finder until you've done 1,000 of them. So trying to make sure that you can kind of build up as much activity and practice. And then stretching to continue to do joint work, even after you've kind of gotten comfortable. And then I'm a huge believer in designations, the regional annual meetings, attending home office academies, working with coaches, like our relationship. That trust factor now isn't really as much of a concern because I know we're going to take care of our clients versus early. I think there was probably like a little bit of that, like I just didn't have my own belief, but now that I know and I trust myself, that creates, I think, a stronger trust factor with our clients.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. You're delivering the value. You have something important that you
yeah.
can help them with.
One other thing I'll mention too, Jen, I personally feel a lot more comfortable, and then I can be more relevant quicker in meetings. We have a tighter approach where people are more prepared to meet versus I think we kind of beat around the bush a little bit at the beginning. We're also more direct with our recommendations because we have that trusted relationship with the client. I can also be a lot more intentional in the meeting, and I think that took me some time to kind of get comfortable with, but now it's really sped up all aspects of the planning.
Yeah. And I know some of the things that we've been working on together, we've talked about, as you've shifted from just as much, still do tremendous high activity, but still trying to now get more laser focused with those prospects and how do you connect with them? We've been working on some of your processes in that space. Do you want to talk a little bit about the journey you're on now? As it's not just about the number, but it's more and more about, are they the right people that you can really have the most impact on?
For sure. So something that I think Northwestern is also doing a better job with this is really getting the idea of segmentation. I don't think I really had a good grasp on segmentation until I was probably 5 years into the business. If you can get into that really early and have like a really clearly delineated like where each person is, it allows you then to work towards, okay, do I need to have fewer meetings like in the C space? How many am I actually keeping in the A and the A plus space? So when you have those clear definitions, and that's something that you've helped with and we've gotten a little tighter with, procedurally speaking, we can look at our kept meetings for last month and say, hey, this is really the place we know we're trending up. And then obviously PPL kind of comes along and you'll be able to watch and track that. So I'd say segmentation has been a big part of it, tracking your kept meetings, being intentional about that. And then it's also having, even if for me, I didn't want to have to turn somebody away. So having a deep system of like, whether it's, still referring to the interns in the office or a brand new rep, I truly believe there's always somebody that can help the person, even if it's not our team. So that kind of helps as well to make sure that it's not like we're saying no to business. We're just allowing that business to go to somebody else in the office potentially.
I think from a consumer perspective, that's really meaningful too, because nobody feels like, oh, I'm just not good enough. Like, he's not going to help me and everything. That you make sure that somebody is going to take care of them, that there is somebody that can meet their needs and make sure that they feel valued and taken care of as well.
Yeah, I think for me, that was a stigma of the business even before coming in, was kind of like suit and tie, or like only this type of person should have it just because of my relationship with my MD. I felt special, but like normally I wouldn't be an ideal NM client. But to fast forward, it's like, I really believe everybody should have a plan at every stage of life. If they're 20, if they're 30, if they're 50, if they're 70, it's exciting to know that we can help everybody.
So what are some ways that you help people to know that, that there's probably plenty of other consumers out there too, where like, I'm not their client, or I don't make enough money and everything. Like, how do you attract those people or let those people that, you can help? How do you get your message out there to reach them?
I think it's reading the audience, and this kind of even ties into the prospecting aspect, and kind of touch on here in a second about like DPMs and when we're looking for referrals. But if you can learn about the person before you even meet them, and obviously I think one of the things we love to practice is empathy and understanding, to try to figure out where somebody's coming from before you even meet them. I think we can be better prepared then for maybe facing that conversation if they might have their own stigmas. And so again, it's relatability. It's just trying to I hear you, active listening skills. We're able to then process and help them understand we are on their side. So I think it really is it's the humility, the human aspect of getting connected to somebody that we take a lot of pride in, and then we can get them. You have to meet the person first where they're at before you can help them make a change.
So talk a little bit about how do you do that? Is it when you're asking for the introduction, going a little bit deeper on who that person is? Are there some other things that you do that maybe you can share that might be some helpful tips for our audience?
Sure. And actually, just this morning, I had one. I got a text message last night saying, "Hey, Joe, I've got a friend who's interested in insurance. He'll reach out to you." And the first thing I did is laughed and said, "No, he won't," because how many of them ever actually follow up on that? So my response back to him was, "What's the best way to reach him?" Now, I didn't say he's not going to reach out, but I still, what's the best way to reach him? And next thing you know, I've got the little contact info. But I also said, Ryan, tell me a little bit about the person, maybe an interest or something unique about them. And to me, that's an icebreaker, especially if you're calling somebody you haven't met on before, just to learn something that's a fun icebreaker. I really do try to make sure that when we get referrals, we're kind of, it's not just a name and a phone number, but tell me something about them as a human. What's going to get us excited for that conversation?
Yeah. And I think you've done a really nice job of continuing that personal feel through both. I know you guys are starting to do more in your social media presence and how you communicate on your website, but then with your gifting has been a part of that transition, I think, this year too. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing in that space to continue to deepen those relationships that you have with, especially those really good clients that you want to nurture.
And I think, thanks for bringing that up. That was a big part of, I'd say, being mostly at home for the past year, almost everybody being at home. We usually would do a ton of lunches, coffees, maybe like a happy hour where we'd be getting out and seeing people, but we've been missing that physical presence. And you had connected us with the Expressory, which is a really nice boutique type firm that will help you kind of customize client appreciation or, birthdays. And we sent out kind of like to our A-pluses over Christmas, we sent out about 15 care packages, as I called them. And each family, we had like a list that, some were kids, some were single, some, were in different stages, to be able to take it and actually personalize each one of those care packages, which was unique to that family. That had tremendous impact. We ended up hearing back from a couple of them right away saying thank you. Those led to a couple of review meetings, and ultimately there was business that was had, but it still was that act of gratitude. And so the Expressory, now we're also sending out birthday cards with them. We used to do those ourselves, but that's outsourced. The quality is awesome, and it just has a personal touch. And we're getting thank yous for the birthday cards now, which isn't the intention, but it's just it's nice to see.
You're starting the thank yous for the thank yous.
Yeah, and that's fun because we don't do it for the thanks, but we certainly appreciate when the thank you comes across.
Yeah, I was listening to the Power Positive the other day, and they were talking about too the practicing that random appreciation too, where it's not always just tied to a major holiday of those opportunities to just surprise and delight people when they're not expecting it at all, that really start to set you apart and take that relationship times in terms of, do I like you? Like, okay, I'm experiencing you in different ways. And certainly some people probably want more of the gifts versus, I'd rather let's sit down and have lunch, but trying to figure out what they're most interested in. And in the world that we're in today, it sounds like you guys have done a good job of starting to, kind of pivot of what can you do and finding a way forward that works for you and your clients.
Well, it's all intentionality. I think, with the chaotic practice that we have with high activity, we find ourselves usually just kind of sprinting towards everything, and little things just kind of like fall to the cracks. But then to have a focus, to outsource some of it, our relationship, there's an intentionality now to that gratitude that we're giving, and to say thank you. And that'll turn into also a stronger relationship with the clients long-term to have that as well.
Right. One thing we always like to do is to make sure that we leave the audience with something that's really practical, try it at work. We like to call it the next couple weeks that they could do to, maybe, accelerate. Cause I think most people probably feel pretty good of like, hey, my clients like me, I'm social, they get me and stuff. But, what's one thing that you would recommend for them that maybe they could do to go a little bit further with how they're known, liked, or trust with their audience?
Well, I think that right there is kind of the key. If you have a client that's already working with you, they know you, like you, or trust you. Or even if you have some centers of influence, they might not be clients, but they still might know you and like you and trust you. So one thing I would suggest, and this is something that we started doing fairly recently, is if you haven't already, kind of create like a top 10 or a top 25 list of people who, that if you just reached out to them, they're very likely to take a meeting with you. And this might be like a flashback to like your prospecting binges when you first started the career, but to have a goal of trying to set 2 of those meetings, and we call them DPMs or dedicated prospecting meetings, try to set 2 of those a week. So you're not doing it all at once. And then you can kind of spread it into the calendar, say over the next month or 2, and then also have a goal for that meeting. I always feel like if you go in with a goal, it's a lot easier to accomplish something versus you're like, hey, I'm gonna set this meeting, but I hope something good comes from it. Well, if you're young in the business, maybe it's 5 to 10 referrals. If you're kind of a little further in, like we are, 2 or 3 awesome handheld relationship connections is all we're looking for. So work on scheduling those DPMs, come up with a top 10 to top 25 of who would be the first people you reach out to for that list. And then start to execute that over the next couple of weeks. That's something you can do right away. And you'll probably have a much stronger type of a referral that comes from them.
Great advice. And I think one of the things that we've talked about too is, how can you utilize things that maybe they posted on social media or people they've engaged with, or, other insights, what email newsletter content have they engaged in? What else can you use that will help you in those conversations to really get to the people that they have a relationship with, they care about, that could really benefit from having a conversation with you and your team?
Yeah, and I think that's even where you've kind of turned the tables on me when we've had some of these coaching meetings where all of a sudden you're like, Joe, I know Irish dance is big for you. You post about that all the time, or I know you golf, or hey, the house,
Dance
or whatever
dad.
it is. Dance dad, sure. So
We're
I
gonna start
think,
using that hashtag, dance
but
dad.
again, it just goes back to the point of being empathetic to learning about somebody. So how long does it take for you to find out? And if they are a person that you already know, if they're a friend of yours or a client of yours, I hope you know something about these people. So again, it's just it's making sure you're picking up on the signs that they're tossing out, because they're giving you signs nowadays. It's pretty hard not to know what somebody's into in 2021 with all the tools around you now to work with somebody.
Well, I appreciate that. We're going to wrap up our content portion here, open it up to questions. So if anybody's with us, they can put that in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll take those. I know one of the questions I often hear is around, just how do you do it all, and you've talked about, us working together a little bit, using the expressory. How do you approach that in terms of, making a decision of what do you guys do? What do you keep trying to do yourself versus when it's the right time, maybe to leverage other resources to help deliver some of this?
I think what I've found, and my team will say this too, we come up with a lot of ideas, but usually what ends up happening is the drop off is the implementation. And so having a coach or having somebody that's going to partner with you is also kind of some accountability that comes with it, but also a little bit more actual, wherewithal to what is the process going to be. So, and I've always gone to the annual meetings, and I'm like, you see somebody on stage, and how often do you hear about them thanking a coach too? And so, athletes have coaches, nobody ever stops. And so for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Now, early in the business, you have a hard time swallowing the pill of whatever the cost might be. But in reality, if you shift the idea of cost to investment, you're just investing into the practice. And it's pretty hard not to actually find a rate of return that's also tax deductible, by the way, on the expense side, unless you really are hell-bent against trying to make a change. It just enhances the goal. So for me, it's a leverage, and it's an outsourcing of something we couldn't do already ourselves, or a way to find some efficiency. But especially now in a few years in, it's an absolute no-brainer to have a team of coaches.
Right. Well, and when as questions are coming in here, one thing that I want to ask you as a follow-up is, now we've been having some conversations recently too around, events or content in magazines and some of those things. How do you feel like those opportunities position you and help maybe people that get to know you and see you in a different space maybe than what they would by just those one-on-one introductions? What did they do for your business?
So for me, I think that actually ties to the knowing aspect when you mentioned know, like, and trust is if we can get out there and just have kind of like a broader exposure. Now, I don't necessarily want to be the guy on the freeway sign that everybody drives. And I'm like, I think that's a little too much exposure. And who's really jotting down his phone number? But, if there can be some casual, passive ways of getting in front of people. But then I think the key that we're working on next year is like, okay, how can you keep targeting them in addition to that first impression? It's going to become a name in the community ultimately is the goal. Where it's not like all of a sudden who's Joe Pitterle or who's Northwestern Mutual, but like, oh, I saw him in my mailbox, or if a neighbor talked about him or he sponsored an event. I think that's kind of the goal, is just more organically growing that exposure in the community.
Yeah. And I think you said that, well, you're not trying to just be everywhere to all people, still being very targeted of who your audience is and how do you get in front of them. But when you get in front of them, how can you make it where it's in many different ways? So they don't just experience you and see you one time in this one spot where it's like, yeah, I did an ad on the baseball field, that maybe somebody saw when they went to the game, but then, maybe they're also seeing you, at the events or an article in the newspaper, in the brochure, multiple places where it really starts to get, the same thing that I think you talk about with clients that more and more keeps hitting me, and from the marketing perspective too, is that compounding effect. And I think you're probably starting to see some of that with your marketing efforts over how much you guys have put in place the last few years, and how it's just building for you and those processes as well. So one of the questions we have is around the processes. You talked about, trying to streamline those, trying to make sure that it doesn't just fall down in execution. How do you make sure that you have a system to execute on the marketing, to do the gifts? I mean, besides just leveraging other people to do some of that for you, how have you guys found that works for you?
Well, so again, going back to the activity, if we never took a break, we just keep working. So for me, it's putting time into the calendar. Our coaching time is sacred. It's always going to be in there. We're not rescheduling that. We're making sure that we're honoring it. I'm going back to my other coach I work with, who's been doing a phenomenal job, is again also time in there in the calendar. So if the time is there, like that's where the focus is. If it's not scheduled, we just stay busy. So I think the consistency of having, what's the phrase, time in the business, not on the business, but to have more time on the business, not in the business. It's just making sure that that's there so that this doesn't just keep getting swept past us.
Yeah. And I know you and Tennille have done a great job too, of even outside of our meetings, implementing meetings, just the two of you, to talk through like where we at, look at our scorecard, how are we doing? What do we know about our clients, that reflection time, like you said, to be more intentional with your marketing. Because, for most people, it probably is the case that marketing, or at least what I often hear, is marketing happens when I think about it.
Well, and it's also helpful with, again, being remote. We found those Wednesday meetings that we have our team meeting on Monday. We usually touch base throughout the week, but it was nice to have like another face-to-face in the middle of the week, even if it was just 15 to 30 minutes. So I think that also created a little bit of a reinvigoration that we have to how our week is going and what's happening. And then also we've now started rescheduling our offsites with the team, getting together again at the end of a quarter to kind of celebrate in the successes. So I feel like now, as we're kind of coming through coronavirus and the pandemic, it's like now we're getting back to some of the physical, but I think it's been important to make sure that everybody's just doing their thing. You got to make sure you're in touch with them to know what's happening and how they're feeling.
So one last question for you, and it's kind of tied into that nicely. It's around, what do you envision? What is the future going to look like? How much of it is it going back to what you were doing before, or what do you think is going to be different that people maybe should be thinking about in terms of those relationships in a different way than what they were pre-pandemic?
I think this has been an absolute industry changer, a world changer. Like, what does the world look like now post when we've been able to succeed and even grow in a virtual environment? So for me, and again, this is my human side. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old that we're involved in activities. I've been able to spend more time at the dinner table, making dinners, more family walk time. At an age when it's like in the future we might not have that anyways, but so went from a lot of the later, not as many later evenings as I did when I was brand new in the business, but we rarely have a meeting after 6 o'clock now, unless it's intentional for an A+ clients. So I think some of the things that we're going to see is there'll probably be virtual days where there might be days I just work from home. Then there's going to be days that we go out to the community. But I think there's going to be clients that we've come to grips with. It's okay if we don't meet physically. We can still conduct business. And guess what? They have 5 and 6-year-olds at home. They have infants at home. To try to meet at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in an office takes an act of God sometimes. This will be a lot easier, I think, to just, even though we're physically local, to still have virtual meetings, even if you're 20 minutes away from somebody.
So it sounds like you're saying, that, providing those options and having that flexibility, it's not going away. It's more important than ever, that especially as now as maybe people have experienced that, to make sure that you're hearing what works for your clients and your prospects and how do they want to, how do they want to engage?
And I think it also ties again to where they're at. Some of my older clients and maybe more of the wealth management clients, like that might still be physical meetings. That's more their speed. But that younger generation, myself included, like at the end of the day, they want something, they need something, they want to get it at the least, the path of least resistance. Let's continue to help them, meet them where they're at. So we'll meet the client where they're at with what's most comfortable for them. But the virtual side of things, I'm very excited about.
Great. I appreciate those insights, and hopefully that's helpful to our audience, gives you some ideas of kind of, what you should be thinking about as you move forward. If you are interested in learning more about, really maybe where you have some opportunities as it relates to know, like, and trust, and where you could, try a couple of new things in addition to what Joe talked about with the DPM meetings. We have a self-assessment. I'll make sure that's put in the links if you haven't taken that already, as well as a 20 ideas to improve your know, like, and trust. So that might give you ideas of just, picking one. Maybe it's those DPMs like Joe talked about, in terms of how can you get back in front of your clients and maybe have a deeper conversation with them, and just listen and show up and be present for where they're at and being able to add value with them. So as we wrap up today, what we want to make sure that you know about is next week we'll have our Idea Slam, our last one for this spring. Since this was our last webinar, so we'll have our last Idea Slam same time next Thursday, 12 o'clock Central Time. Open mic. You come, bring your ideas, bring your questions, bring your challenges, send your staff with, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and dive into it of like, hey, I want to know more about what Joe was talking about, or some of the things you guys mentioned. This is your opportunity to come and ask your questions. So make sure that you join us for that. You don't want to miss out on that. And I don't know if you know, Joe, but as part of this, we like to do a donation to a charity of your cause of your choice. So who can we help support today?
Sure. So this summer, I think will probably be like the 11th annual Bike MS ride that last year we missed. So I'm actively accepting donations for that ride, and that would obviously be fantastic for anything extra that would go to the upcoming ride in August.
Wonderful. Yeah, we definitely would like to do that. I know that's holds some special meaning to you and your family and everything as well. So I'd love to be able to help support that. Thank you again for your time today and giving back to this community. As we mentioned, think about Joe's try it at work tip to schedule that DPM, aim for 2 a week, but be intentional with it of what do you want to get out of it? How can you add value for that person, as well as what you're trying to do for your business as part of that? And if you want to improve your know, like, and trust, reach out, drop in the message that you'd like that resource. We can get it out to you. And starting in June, we're going to be kicking off an exciting opportunity with our Champions Club. We'll be doing some group coaching. So for some of you too that are maybe a little bit unsure about making that a first investment, or you really love that collaboration opportunity with other people, this might be the right opportunity for you to get involved in that. So reach out if you want to learn more about that opportunity. It's going to be a 3-month program to really help you jumpstart your marketing efforts. As we said, join us next week for the Idea Slam. And, the last piece I'll leave you with today is just, think about where you want to be. As Joe said, don't just work in the business, you want to work on the business as well. So take that step back and think about what is the relationship, what is the experience that you want your brand to be thought of as, to provide. And as you take a step back and think about that and maybe have some conversations with a few people around that, are you there? Are you delivering that right now? Or what's that 1 or 2 things that you can do that will really, go beyond people's expectations when they think about you and your brand and what you're delivering? So I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Joe. And we'll be back next week at the Idea Slam. Bye.
Thank you, Jen. Bye-bye.